Welcome to CUTV Newsbriefs. This is the last edition of Newsbriefs for the semester. I'm Zoltan Szomoru. Here's an update on the Montreal SPCA, which is involved, in a controversy this week. The SPCA was offered free printing services for their upcoming fundraising campaign when the offer was refused. At that point, controversial executive director Alex Wolf resigned. However, board members of the organization claim he was fired because of a conflict of character. While Wolf was director, the lines of communication between staff and administrators were blocked. The SPCA has been working on a fundraising campaign for 4 months now to keep the shelter afloat. Last Friday was the National Day Against Violence Against Women. To commemorate this, the Concordia Women's Centre, in association with the National Film Board of Canada and the Montreal YWCA, had a benefit evening for Secours aux Femmes with speakers on the subject as well as representatives from other Montreal organizations. The highlight of the evening was the showing of a new film called The Vienna Tribunal by award-winning feminist filmmaker Jerry Rogers, who has made a documentary about the Human Rights Conference at Vienna for the United Nations, which took place in 1993. For those who missed this premiere, it will be shown on Vision TV on Wednesday, December 7th at 9 p.m. And in sports this week, the Stingers men's hockey team skated all over the Griffins last weekend. The Stingers tied Guelph 3-3 on Friday, pulverizing the U of T 5-4 a day later. What the two games had in common was a 1-goal deficit in the third period. In the Guelph game, forward Daniel Paradis got the equalizer, while forwards Dave Sabo and Mathieu Brunet scored the 2 last goals in the Toronto game. With these last 5 points, the Stingers have moved into first place in the Far East Division. And in international news, here's a story on the situation in South Africa. South Africans are skeptical of Nelson Mandela's ability to implement promised changes to the country. Apparently, the minority white population still has enormous privileges in employment and education. The difficulty appears to be in the population's ideas. However, the absence of civil war and conflict between blacks and whites is viewed as a positive change. Increasing concerns are the rising crime rate as well as unemployment. To implement his promised changes, Mandela has been obliged to borrow funds from the International Monetary Fund, which only increases the number of interests Mandela must juggle before he can fully commit himself to the electorate. Hello, today we're interviewing Cristina B, editor-in-chief of the CSU Voice. Cristina, what is The Voice?
The Voice is a newspaper that has been produced by the Student Union here at Concordia University, and its purpose is twofold. First, we think that students should be knowing where their fees are going and what's happening with them, so we try to inform students as much as possible of the activities that we are doing within our offices and around the campus that use their fees, and also clubs and associations that are being fed money by the Student Union, what they're doing as well as general stuff that we think they should be knowing about. That's it. It's a newspaper. So that could answer the question.
What was the reason behind establishing this newspaper, this newsletter?
Well, basically, what I already said, and it was because I think a lot of the other newspapers that are around campus have to focus on stories that are necessarily, big showstopper kind of stories, and I think here we're able to cover things that may not be showstoppers, but may be something that students really need to know. Things about Senate, Board of Governors, Arts and Science Faculty Council, Commerce Faculty Council, activities all around Axworthy, what's happening with that, all sorts of topics, as well as we can do club highlights on different clubs that are doing things for students. We're not controlled by the things that they necessarily are, so we're able to cover things that may just be informative rather than newsworthy.
Tell us, how does The Voice basically get funded? Because the newspapers on campus are all fed through tuition fees from students. What's the situation with The Voice?
Well, as far as things have been going, so far, we've been able to cover the costs through advertising, like other newspapers. We're a smaller size, so it's obviously easier to get enough advertising to cover when you're doing just 4 pages and possibly 8. Therefore, the size of our newspaper, it relies a lot on how much advertising we get, and then we add stories as we go along. The reason for this is that we knew there were already other newspapers on campus and didn't really think that in our financial crises from past administrations that the students really needed to pay for another publication. So we're doing our best to cover the costs from external sources. That's about it.
Mm-hmm. Tell us also, at the beginning of the year, the first edition of The Voice came out with another name, The Ink. After several editions, the ink was crossed and it was called The Voice. What was going on there?
Well, basically, we came out with ink, and that was a play on ink, you know, what it's made out of, which was a great idea because Concordia Student Union incorporated also. But we realized as we went along that the purpose of this newsletter was really not it wasn't really announced in the title of the newsletter. And so we searched for something that would be more fitting, and we thought that the voice of the students, and that's what we're trying to do, is get the voice of students out to administration and to other students, so to make a difference, I guess, to make an impact.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. With its format, the format is much smaller than the student newspapers, the Concordian, The Link, also Thursday Report. Mm-hmm. You can't really get into a big story with that format.
Well, like I said, we don't necessarily go for the big stories, long stories. What we try to do is take information and compact it into informative stories that say everything in so many words, shorter amount of words, that basically inform you of the same things, just not necessarily so that it's you know, newsworthy, so that people, you know, journalists look at it and say, wow, that's really good, as journalists go. We're just trying to get information out, and normally a lot of things that go on within these walls can be put on the paper, even in that size. And other things that are external that don't necessarily affect Concordia community, or things like sports, which we don't normally cover, are covered by the other papers. So we're not trying to step over the toes of other papers. We just want to try to improve the information flow in the university. I mean, it always needs improvement. Even with 3 newspapers, there's still a lot of things that people just don't know about.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay.
For CUTV Newsbriefs, I'm Zoltan Szomoru.
And now it's time for our weekly contest. The question for this week was, who is the floor manager of CUTV Newsbriefs? And the answer is correct. The name is Dale L. Grobley, and the winner is Nikki Mitsialis. Well, congratulations, Nikki. Stop by our offices at 651-1 here in the Hall building to pick up your prize. For all of us here at CUTV Newsbriefs, I'm Zoltan Szomoru, wishing you a Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and good luck with your exams. And with an editorial this week about the closure of Langley Hall, here's William Richard Doucette.
I'm William Richard Doucette, and I was just reading the link, and it says you're changing the face of Loyola. What a good idea. The bad part is that you turn to page 3 and the changing of the face means the closing of Concordia's residences. And that, I think, is a shame. So I'm going to propose a solution. My solution is simple. If the students buy the residences from the school, apply to the respective Hydro-Quebec, Gas Metropolitan, whatever, for the grants needed to renovate the buildings, as well as the city of Montreal, renovates the buildings and turns them into a housing co-op, owned by the students, operated by the students, with student shareholders, paying the minimum needed to maintain the buildings and to pay the mortgage. It would be great. It would be low-income housing for students, by students, and the university could only benefit. We're going to be needing things like this anyway, since Mr. Axworthy is going to make getting an education almost impossibly expensive. That's all I had to say.